Hello out there, all you keen historians, and welcome to your second lesson using the Industrial Revolution website on child labour. This lesson is the second lesson we're doing on child labour under the child labour tab. So you like to scroll down to about halfway down the page to access lesson 2, some jobs children had during the Industrial Revolution. So let's have a look at your learning intention and success criteria. So by the end of today's lesson, you need to know the jobs children had during the Industrial Revolution, and you need to be able to explain the nature and dangers of jobs children had during the Industrial Revolution. So let's have a look at some of these jobs now. So the first one is newsies. So newsies were children who sold newspapers in large cities. They were usually orphaned boys who had no other way of generating any money. Newsies didn't work for anyone. They ran their own businesses. They did this by buying cheap newspapers every morning and then selling them again for a profit. So you can tell there was a bit of risk involved in this job because they had to sell them in busy places, otherwise they would lose money. So when you're a newsie, you had to make sure you sold all your newspapers so you actually gained some money. Newsies put themselves in harm's way every day. You can imagine these boys standing alone, very young, in busy streets. They certainly suffered a lot of physical abuse as well as sexual abuse in some cases as well. Next job is breaker boys. So breaker boys got their name because they worked in coal mines and used their bare hands to break the coal into smaller pieces and separate impurities from the coal. So they just wanted to get rid of the dirt away from the coal, just so you were left with coal. So their main job was to separate chunks of coal by hand. Breaker boys were normally aged between 8 to 12, and their workday was usually 10 hours long, 6 days a week. Breaker boys often cut themselves on the coal. Many of them developed lung cancer and asthma because of the coal, smoke and dust they would inhale every single day. Breaker boys also lost limbs and fingers when they would get caught in the conveyor belts as well. Next one here are match girls. So match girls was the name given to girls who worked in match factories that dipped matches into phosphorus. So the little red stuff that you see on the end of matches. They stood for 12 hours a day dipping the matches. The phosphorus made them constantly sick and caused them to lose their teeth. So again, some very harsh consequences for being a match girl. The next one are climbing boys. You can watch this video here which explains what climbing boys are and write down 3 facts in your book. But essentially, climbing boys were essentially young boys who were like chimney sweeps, except they were like apprentice chimney sweeps. So if you lived old enough to become an actual chimney sweep, you would actually then be the boss of other climbing boys. So again, climbing boys were smaller than chimney sweeps because they were younger and they could get into the chimneys that normal chimney sweeps could not. All right, guys, your first task is some comprehension questions using the Duxters website. So go ahead and click on this image and answer these questions together. You can actually use most of the notes from up here to answer those questions too. Guys, we're going to have a look at these sources together now for task 2, your source work. So you've got 1, 2, 3 sources here and then a Kahoot to finish. But we're going to have a look at the sources together now. So number 1 is a photograph taken by Lewis Hine in 1911 of 3 breaker boys. So number 1, is this a primary or secondary source? And why it is a primary source? Because it was taken during the Industrial Revolution by someone who was there. Now, a photograph is a primary source, so it is primary. Who created the source is Lewis Hine. He's the photographer. When was the source created is 1911. What emotional response do you feel when you look into their eyes? So this is an extremely, extremely powerful photo. I feel extremely sorry for these boys. I can also tell how mature and how hard-working they are as well. That's what I would put for number 4. Why did Lewis Hine take this photo? He wanted to raise awareness for the hardships that breaker boys and other child labourers or child workers faced during the Industrial Revolution to put an end to it. Number 6, how can you tell the boys suffer poor working conditions? Well, 1, they look extremely sad. They even look a little cold, but mostly you can tell they're extremely dirty. You can see the dirt from the remnants of the smoke and the coal on their faces, but also the state of their clothes as well is extremely dirty. Moving on to source 2. Source 2 and 3 are written sources, so it always helps to read the source first and then answer the questions. So source 2 is an extract from John C. Cobden's 1854 book, The White Slaves of England. The extract is about a boy named John Gibb describing how he is beaten at work in a textile factory. So let's read the source together before we begin. So John Gibb, 11 years old, solemnly sworn, deposes that he has been about 3 years apiece in one of the spinning rooms, that the heat and confinement makes his feet sere, and makes him sick and have headaches, and he often has a stitch in his side. That he is now much paler than he used to be, probably because he's been inside all the time, and that he receives 4 shillings a week, which he gives to his mother, and that he's very desirous of short hours, that he might go to school more than he can do at present. So he wants to go to school. He actually doesn't want to work. He actually wants to go to school, which I know will take many of you by surprise. And that the spinners often lick him when he's at fault with tools of leather. So lick means they whip him or hit him with pieces of leather when he does the wrong thing, when he stuffs up. So number 1, is this a primary or secondary source? I'm going to leave that one up to you guys to answer. Consider the fact that this is a written source, but also that John Gibb is essentially giving a first-hand account of what the working conditions for kids were like during the Industrial Revolution in textile factories. Who created the source? You can actually have 2 answers for this. So it's found in John C. Cobden's book, but also John Gibb. So you can have both of those as co-contributors for this source. When was the source made? 1854 is the only one we have. Only date we have, I should say. Number 4, how long has John been working as a piecer? So if we go here, it's been 3 years a piecer, so that's your answer for number 4. According to the source, what is working in a factory like? Well, it sounds very terrible. It's hot, he's on his feet constantly, which causes his feet to be sore. He also has a stitch. You can also tell because it must be quite confined because he's now much paler than he used to be, so there mustn't be a lot of sunlight getting in there. And also, your bosses hit you when you do the wrong thing. How much is John paid a week? He's paid 4 shillings a week. And what does he do with his pay? He gives it to his mother, which all kids had to do. And then what does lick mean? Again, it means hit or whipped. Source 3, last one, again, is an extract from the same book, but this extract is a girl named Belle describing what it's like to work in a textile factory. Now, Belle actually knows John. They work in the same factory. So these are kids who work in the same textile factory. So is this a primary? Actually, let's read the source first. How silly of me. So Belle Sinclair, 13 years old, solemnly sworn deposes that she's been about 4 years in the same flat with John Gibb, a preceding witness. So again, she knows John Gibb. That all the spinners in the apartment keep a leather strap or tools with which to punish the pieces, both boys and girls. The young ones chiefly when they are negligent. That she is often punished by Francis Gibb. Now you'll notice she's punished by someone called Francis Gibb, who shares a name with John. So Francis Gibb may be John's father, and by Robert Clark, both with tools and with their hands, and often with an open cuff. That he has licked her on the side of the head and on her back with his hands, and with a strap on her back and arms. That she has never much the worse of the beating, which means she doesn't let it get to her too much, although she has sometimes cried and shed tears when Gibb or Clark is hitting her. Deposes that she cannot write. So that means she's saying she can't write. So is this a primary or secondary source? Bit of a giveaway for number 1 for source 2, but this is a primary source because it is Belle, who was there during the Industrial Revolution, who faced these horrendous working conditions, suffered under them, gives her account of the event. So it's a first-hand account. Who created the source? Again, you've got 2 answers because there's co-contributors. So it's found in Cobden's book, but it's also Belle sharing her side of the story. So number 2, you've got 2 answers there. When was the source created? Again, 1854. How old is Belle? She's only 13 years old. Number 6, how are Belle and the other children punished? Well, it sounds like they're punished quite a lot. They're often hit physically by Gibb and Clark, but also they're also whipped by them with pieces of leather as well. How can you tell that Belle has no education? Well, she says at the very end that she cannot write, so that's how you can tell she's got no education. And you can see these written sources, these kids giving their experience and sharing their experience of what it's like to be a kid working in these factories back then. It's just horrendous. And then lastly, guys, just to round off, there's a summary Kahoot of some of the jobs that kids had during the Industrial Revolution. And that concludes your lesson for today. So thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to stay updated to any new websites or lessons that are made at existing websites like this one here, please go ahead and subscribe. Cheers.